true crime story of a loving husband, thought to be possessed by 40 demons, became the subject of an all-night exorcism, and less than 2 hours later, ripped his wife and dog to pieces with his bare hands. Born at the tail end of the Second World War in 1944. Michael was raised in the English market town of Ossett in Wakefield, West Yorkshire. Though Ossett was very much a Christian town, the Taylor family were not overly religious and never found the time to attend the local churches. Neighbors of the family described them as mild-mannered and full of kindness, despite their unwillingness for a religious life. Michael became a full-time butcher and married the love of his life, Christine, soon after. By the early 1970s, the couple had 5 children and were living in a small rustic house in the town they'd both grown up in with their dog. Michael hurt his back in an accident that forced him to leave the butcher's job and struggled to find full-time employment afterwards. He suffered bouts of depression which saw him becoming withdrawn from the community, and he became less social with those around him. This caught the attention of one of his friends, Barbara Wardman, who believed the only cure for his depression was religion. Barbara introduced him to a church group called the Gobber Christian Fellowship, despite Michael not attending church regularly. He attended the first group meeting with Christine, and both were so impressed with the group's outlook on life that they converted straight away, when Michael's depression began to improve after a number of group meetings. His friends and members of the church believed it had improved purely on the basis of spiritual intervention and by the hand of God himself. While at the church meetings, Michael became besotted with the 20-year-old lay preacher, Marie Robinson. A lay preacher is a preacher or religious servant who is not a formally ordained cleric and helps the church in the promotion and function of its beliefs. Within a few months, their friendship had reportedly become carnal, another way of saying they were intimately engaged. Marie's soft-spoken leadership of the group was too much for Michael to ignore, and he spent as much time with her as he could. Soon enough, Marie held private meetings with Michael, where he would supposedly talk in tongues and made the sign of the cross with his hands for hours on end. Believing it would quieten the dark and evil power of the moon, the opposite to the light and goodness of the sun. Michael began joining in some of the sermons and helped cast out demons from other group members, even though neither Marie nor Michael were trained exorcists. They were simply using their positions to empower themselves. A few weeks later, members of the group met at Michael's home, and Christine voiced her opinion that Michael was spending too much time with Marie. Michael then forced Marie upstairs, where she rejected his advances before rejoining the group. When Marie rejected him in his own home, Michael's attitude changed and he became argumentative with Christine at every opportunity. He withdrew back into depression, acted irrationally, and developed a bad attitude towards the church group. Then Michael attacked Marie in full view of the group. He rose from his seat and stared at her with wild, bestial eyes, and a look of a man intent on killing. Marie began screaming out of fear at the sight of him, but Michael grabbed her by the shoulders and neck and shouted at her in tongues. Marie called upon the name of Jesus, and the other members of the group managed to restrain Michael, who had no memory of what had gone down. Concerned he was becoming possessed by a demon, the congregation called on a local priest and his wife to intervene. Peter and Sally Vincent invited Michael to their home for an assessment, where Michael threw their cat out of a window and broke some pottery in anger. After witnessing his anger and actions, the Vincents put together a team of people to help in an exorcism at the church. On October 5, 1974, as the midnight hour dawned, Michael was summoned to St. Thomas Church, where he was restrained and underwent a 7-hour exorcism. Peter and his team burned Michael's crucifix, pushed wooden crosses into his mouth, doused him with holy water and screamed at him to dispel the demons. At the court case following the murder, Peter confirmed they had exorcised a total of 40 demons who had taken residence within Michael. Coincidentally, the only demons they couldn't exorcise were those associated with murder, violence, and insanity. The priests told Michael not to worry about the other 3 demons and that they would exorcise them at a later date, so he was sent home. Less than 2 hours later, a policeman on a routine patrol through the town stumbled on a gruesome sight. Michael was ambling along the street completely naked and covered head to toe in blood, screaming about the demons within him and Satan himself. The officer managed to restrain Michael and took him to a hospital. Before heading to Michael's home where more police were outside. Their neighbors had heard violent noises and already called police. When the officer arrived, a senior detective stumbled out the house and vomited in the front garden, telling him not to go inside as Christine Taylor had been ripped at and left in a mess. In a possessed rage, Michael had killed his wife by tearing at her face and chest with his bare hands. He ripped out her eyes and tongue, and according to the autopsy report, had almost ripped off her entire face from her skull. He had then strangled the family dog to death before tearing its body to pieces, ripping its limbs off and covering himself in its blood, along with the walls and floor. When Michael was arrested in hospital, he claimed that the evil inside her had been destroyed. In an unprecedented trial, Michael was acquitted on the grounds of insanity. A defense psychologist posited the theory that Michael's actions were a direct result of the intense psychological torment he had suffered at the exorcism, and laid blame on the priests involved. The priests who were brought in to testify stated they had expelled all but 3 of the demons, and it was one of the 3 demons that had possessed Michael and used his body to kill Christine. Though the trial didn't prove that Michael was possessed, it did lead to him being acquitted. Michael was sent to the infamous Broadmoor Psychiatric Hospital for 2 years before being transferred to a lower security facility for another 2. He was released just 4 years after brutally murdering his wife and dog. If any of this sounds familiar. The case was mentioned in the 2021 film The Conjuring, The Devil Made Me Do It, which is based on the 1981 trial of American murderer Arne Cheyenne Johnson, who claimed he was possessed by a demon. The case was investigated by demonologists Ed and Lorraine Warren, who believed that Arne was indeed possessed. Arne was ultimately convicted of manslaughter and spent 5 years in prison. Demonic possession was never proven. The exorcism of Michael Taylor raised many public questions that were never answered, including why the priests in charge of the exorcism had never been charged with psychological damage, or why Michael was released only 4 years later, whether he was possessed, psychologically tortured, mentally unstable, or a cold-blooded killer, depends on one's own beliefs of the existence of the otherworldly, and that which can inhabit a human body and mind. In 2005, Michael was arrested again for touching a teenage girl, and was admitted to psychiatric care, with the same symptoms as he had showed in the hours before he ripped his wife apart, leading some researchers to suspect that a demon remains within him still. Thanks for watching. Please share and subscribe on my YouTube channel and follow me on Facebook @Monpy Stories for more.